2,000 years ago, Jesus asked his closest friends one question: "Who do you say that I am?" And now, in the year 2026, there's an increasingly common answer. And I believe it's more devastating than we can possibly comprehend. He's a great moral teacher. He's a legend worth learning from. He's a symbol, a story, a useful fiction. The kind of thing you can admire the way you admire Superman, without ever having to believe Jesus was indeed who he claimed to be. Here's the problem: that's not a neutral, modern, scientific view of Jesus. It's actually a much stranger position than the one it's replacing, because it accepts almost none of what the actual historical evidence says, while quietly borrowing all of the moral authority of a man it claims may not have said any of it. In this video, I want to do two things. First, lay out plainly and without needing you to take anything on faith, yet why serious historians, including ones who are not Christians, treat Jesus of Nazareth as about as historically solid as anyone from the ancient world gets, and second, go further than history can take us into what I believe as a Catholic, that this man fulfilled centuries of prophecy, that his life quietly rhymes with the very beginning of the human story, and that the teachings people love to keep while discarding the miracles don't actually survive that operation. Let's start with the driest part, on purpose, because it's the part that needs to be bulletproof before anything else matters. The claim that Jesus never existed at all, full mythicism, is a fringe position. It is not seriously held by the mainstream of historical scholarship, including among scholars who are agnostic or outright hostile to Christianity as a religion. Bart Ehrman, a New Testament scholar who is not a believer and has spent much of his career arguing against the reliability of the Gospels on other grounds, wrote an entire book specifically to push back against Jesus' mythicism because he considered it bad history, not because he had any religious stake in the outcome. Outside the Gospels, we have the Jewish historian Josephus writing about Jesus within about 60 years of the crucifixion. We have the Roman historian Tacitus writing with open contempt for Christians, casually confirming that Christus was executed under Pontius Pilate. Neither of these men had any reason to invent a Jewish preacher from Galilee. They mention him because to them he was simply a known historical fact, an inconvenient one in Tacitus's case, and compare that evidentiary record to how we treat other figures from antiquity. Alexander the Great is one of the most famous men who ever lived, and yet our earliest surviving biography of him was written roughly 300 years after his death. The Gospels, whatever you make of their contents, were written within decades of the events they describe, while people who could have contradicted them were still alive to do so. So, before faith enters the conversation at all, the existence of Jesus as a real historical Jewish man who taught, gathered followers, and was executed by Rome is about as historically secure as anything from the ancient world gets. So, if the historical case is this strong, where did "maybe he's just a symbol" come from? It didn't come from nowhere, and it isn't a conspiracy. It's a real intellectual movement, worth naming honestly. In the 20th century, the theologian Rudolf Bultmann argued for what he called demythologizing the New Testament, stripping away the miracle stories as ancient pre-scientific packaging around a deeper existential message. Later, groups like the Jesus Seminar literally voted with colored beads on which sayings in the Gospels they thought Jesus really said, and quietly set aside almost everything supernatural. There's a pattern underneath all of this going back to the Enlightenment, the drive to separate the historical Jesus, a safe secular teacher-shaped figure, from the Christ of faith, who claimed to forgive sins, called himself the Son of Man, and rose from the dead. That separation lets modern culture keep the parts of Jesus it finds comfortable, while treating the parts it finds difficult as later invention. I think that separation doesn't hold up. and I want to show you why, not just as a matter of apologetics, but because I believe it's true. Everything up to this point has been history, the kind of ground any careful person, believer or not, can stand on. What follows is different. This is where I tell you plainly what I believe as a Catholic and why. Centuries before Jesus was born, Jewish scripture made startlingly specific claims about the Messiah who was to come. Micah names the town, Bethlehem, as the birthplace of a ruler from ancient days. Zechariah describes a king entering Jerusalem humbly on a donkey. The same book names the exact price of a betrayal, 30 pieces of silver. Psalm 22 describes suffering that reads almost like an eyewitness account of crucifixion. Pierced hands and feet, garments divided by lot, written centuries before crucifixion was even a punishment in use. Isaiah 53 describes a suffering servant pierced for our transgressions, and Psalm 16 speaks of a Holy One whose soul is not abandoned to decay. I'll say plainly, scholars debate the dating of some of these texts, and a skeptic will tell you the timeline is contested. Even granting every one of those debates the most generous hearing, what's left is still a body of ancient text converging with striking specificity on the shape of one life centuries before that life happened. That density is hard to wave away as coincidence. There's another piece of this that moves me as much as the prophecy does, maybe more, because it isn't about ancient text. It's about ordinary men and what they were willing to lose. People die for causes they sincerely believe in all the time. History is full of martyrs who were tragically wrong about something they were certain was true. But the apostles are a different case, and worth being precise about why. They weren't dying for a story someone else told them. They were claiming specifically to have personally seen the risen Christ, to have eaten with him, touched him, watched him ascend. That's not second-hand conviction. That's a claim about their own direct physical experience, and the historical record here, while it varies in strength person to person, is genuinely strong in places. The Book of Acts, itself a first-century document, records the death of James, son of Zebedee, at the hands of Herod, plainly and without embellishment. Early Christian writing outside the New Testament, a letter from Clement of Rome, written within decades of the events, refers to Peter and Paul's martyrdoms as already being established fact within the young church. Later tradition adds more detail about the others, some of it more reliably sourced than the rest, and it's fair to hold that later material more loosely. But here's the plain logic of it. Even granting only what's best attested, a person might die for a lie they sincerely believe. It is far harder to explain a whole group of people enduring imprisonment, beatings and execution, one by one, refusing again and again to recant a claim about something they said they witnessed with their own eyes, and never once producing a body or a deathbed confession that the whole thing had been invented. Liars generally don't make reliable martyrs. These men did. Here's where it gets, to me, even more compelling. St. Paul calls Christ the last Adam. That's not poetry for its own sake. It's the key to how the whole story is built. In Genesis, a man in a garden is given one command and chooses his own will over God's. A tree is at the center of it. His disobedience brings death into the world for everyone who shares his nature. Now look at Gethsemane. Another man in another garden, under the full weight of what's coming. Luke tells us he sweat drops like blood, prays the exact opposite prayer, not my will, but yours be done. And it's in that same garden that Judas's betrayal sets everything in motion. The undoing of the fall doesn't begin at an empty tomb 3 days later. It begins right there, in a garden, with an act of total obedience answering an act of total disobedience. The tree that brought death becomes, in Christian reading, the tree of the cross that brings life. Eve's fall is undone in this same tradition by Mary's answer to Gabriel. let it be done to me. Death enters through a garden, and when Mary Magdalene finds the tomb empty, John tells us she mistakes the risen Christ for the gardener. Some read that as no accident at all, that Christ is quite literally in that moment cast as the gardener returning to Eden, undoing a curse that had specifically cursed the ground itself with thorns. It's worth sitting with the fact that the crown pressed onto his head just days before was woven from exactly that plant. Here's the part that, for me, moves this from a beautiful literary pattern to something theologically necessary. Luke's Gospel gives us Jesus' genealogy, and unlike Matthew's version, which stops deliberately at Abraham to establish Jesus as heir to the Jewish covenant, Luke keeps going, past Abraham, past Noah, all the way to, in Luke's own words, Adam, son of God. That's doing real work. Son of Man carries a heavenly exalted meaning from the prophet Daniel, a glorified figure given everlasting dominion. But underneath that title sits its plainer meaning too, son of Adam, son of humanity. And Luke's genealogy grounds that exalted title in actual literal descent. Paul's language about the last Adam only fully works if there's a real, unbroken line running from the first man to Christ, not just a poetic echo, but a genealogical fact. He isn't merely like Adam, he's Adam's own descendant, which is exactly what qualifies him, from the inside of humanity itself, to undo what Adam did. If Christ's own bloodline carries this kind of hidden pattern, it's worth asking whether that pattern stops with him, or whether it's simply the clearest instance of something running through everything he touches. So go back to where we started. Jesus was a good teacher, a helpful legend. Here's the problem C.S. Lewis identified decades ago, and it hasn't aged a day. A man who calmly claimed to forgive sins, called himself one with the Father, and predicted his own resurrection, is not available to us as merely a good moral teacher. Those aren't the claims of a wise man offering nice advice. They're the claims of someone who is either telling the truth, lying outright, or genuinely delusional. Good teacher is the one label the historical evidence doesn't actually leave on the table. And this is what the modern, helpful legend framing quietly steals from people. It lets you admire the Sermon on the Mount while ignoring that the man delivering it claimed authority no mere teacher has ever claimed. It lets you keep love your neighbor and discard I am the resurrection and the life as if they came from two different people, but they didn't. They came from a man history is confident existed, whose life, I believe, was foretold centuries in advance, who reversed in a garden what began in a garden, who was, quite literally, the son of the man whose fall he came to undo. You don't get to keep the ethics and discard the claim. It was never on offer that way. He never asked to be admired from a safe distance. He asked one question to every person who ever met him, and he's still asking it now. Who do you say that I am?